Hey, it's Tucker Carlson. This spring, word began to circulate in Washington that the House Oversight Committee, under its new chairman, Congressman Jamie Comer, had discovered criminal behavior after reviewing thousands of pages of the Biden family's bank records. Now, publicly, to the extent they responded at all, the White House dismissed the investigation as, of course, politically motivated. In any case, irrelevant. Hunter Biden was an adult, so his business dealings had nothing at all to do with his father, in this case, the President of the United States. But in private, everybody understood it wasn't quite that simple. There has long been overwhelming evidence that Joe and Hunter Biden's financial lives are not separate at all, but deeply intertwined. On Hunter Biden's laptop, there's a suggestion that the two of them even at one point shared a bank account. And of course, Hunter Biden wrote himself that he kicked back cash from his foreign business deals to his father. He wrote that bitterly. So the Oversight Committee's investigation was potentially a disaster for the White House, a scandal, possibly even the prelude to criminal charges. So in order to get ahead of all of that, Joe Biden's handlers did the one thing they could do. They set up an MSNBC interview to preemptively whitewash whatever Jamie Comer might find. Here's the results of that. This aired on May 5th.
Sir, there is something personal that's affecting you. Your son, while there's no ties to you, could be charged by your Department of Justice. How will that impact your presidency?
First of all, my son's done nothing wrong. I trust him. I have faith in him. And it impacts my presidency by making me feel proud of him.
Okay, time for the master class for free. You can audit it. Here it goes. Sir, showing appropriate respect, says the shill, there is something personal that's affecting you. Note the wording. Personal, not of public concern, nothing law enforcement might be interested in, but personal, a sad family tragedy. That's the framing. And then this, a sentence choreographed to the letter. Your son, while there's no ties to you, could be charged by your Department of Justice. Got that? Well, there's no tie to you. So the answer is, in fact, in the question. Whatever Hunter Biden goes down for, and we know he is going to be charged because MSNBC said so, but when that happens, that's Hunter's problem. It's got nothing to do with Joe Biden. Rest easy, America. 5 days later, the Oversight Committee released its findings, and they were, in fact, devastating. Quote, bank records show the Biden family, their business associates, and their companies, their many companies, received over $10 million from foreign nationals and their related companies, the committee wrote. Investigators had, quote, identified payments to Biden family members from foreign companies while Joe Biden served as vice president and after he left public office. So actually there was something there. It was a scandal. Racketeering, money laundering, wire fraud, those are some of the crimes the Bidens seem to have committed, in addition, of course, to selling out the United States for cash. So what would happen to them? Well, Donald Trump had an idea, quote, they'll hit Hunter with something small to make their strike on me look fair. Trump wrote that about 2 weeks ago, and it turned out those were prescient words. This morning, Hunter Biden pleaded guilty to pretty much nothing. Biden pled to 2 misdemeanor tax evasion charges, then entered a diversion on a federal gun charge. That's it. As far as Merrick Garland's Justice Department is concerned, Hunter Biden is done. There was no pre-dawn raid carried live simultaneously on CNN. There was no perp walk, no handcuffs, no press conference. Above all, there was no felony. Hunter Biden, who broke federal gun laws, can still carry a gun. It's like it all never happened. In fact, the Justice Department just baptized Hunter Biden. A lifetime of sins washed away in an instant. It was a secular miracle. Most miraculous of all, Hunter Biden somehow escaped a FARA charge. FARA is the Foreign Agent Registration Act, and it is exactly what its name suggests. Under federal law, if you are acting as an agent of a foreign nation in Washington, you are required to register with our government to let everybody know. Well, for decades, pretty much nobody in Washington did register under FARA, and precisely no one was ever prosecuted for it. No one. But starting several years ago, the Justice Department began sending people to prison on FARA violations. The official explanation was, we're cracking down on foreign influence in Washington. And of course, privately, everyone in Washington laughed. They knew that was absurd. In fact, it's the opposite of the truth. Foreign powers have never had more power in Washington. Their agents are everywhere, in every federal agency and throughout business. down to and including in executive positions at various social media companies. The Biden administration knows all of this, and it's not a problem. In fact, it's their policy. From the administration's perspective, the concerns and the demands of, say, the Chinese government, or particularly the Ukrainian government, are far more important than the needs of American voters. We're cracking down on foreign influence. Please. The point, the only point of enforcing FARA after decades of ignoring it, is to harass and imprison high-profile political opponents. Trump donor Elliot Broidy pled to a FARA violation a few years ago. So did Trump campaign manager, famously Paul Manafort. He went to prison. Last year, the DOJ went after Trump confidant Steve Wynn under FARA. But in the end, the Biden administration overreached so comically that the whole thing was thrown out by a judge. But they tried. So as long as they're trying, if it was a fair system, Hunter Biden would be first on the list of those next to be charged with a FARA violation. In fact, many of them. Hunter Biden was a foreign agent. He never registered as one. But for years, that's exactly what he was. He sold access to his father and other lawmakers to the Chinese and the Ukrainians and countries throughout the world. There's no debate about that. The FBI has known about it for years. For years, they've had possession of Hunter Biden's laptop. But they didn't charge him for it today. They never will. Why? Well, you know the answer. Hunter Biden has good genes. A more interesting question, though, which is another question the feds will never consider, is what does Hunter Biden do for a living now? This is a man with no obvious job and, of course, zero skills. He spent midlife smoking crack. Yet somehow he's managed to live pretty well despite rising inflation. He's been living in big houses in the costliest residential neighborhoods in the world. He's been paying his stripper baby mama $20,000 a month in child support. And he has retained a team of the most expensive lawyers in the country who spend quite a bit of time sending threatening letters to anyone who asks questions about how they're being paid. We can confirm that firsthand. So again, what does Hunter Biden do for work? That's a fair question. And tonight we have the answer. For years, Hunter Biden was an influence peddler. Now, Hunter Biden is a self-actualizer. He self-actualizes for a living. He gets in touch with himself, his feelings, and he follows his muse. Here he is explaining his new vocation in a 2019 ABC News interview.
This is new. It's your studio.
Yeah.
But now he's opening the doors to a place never captured by a paparazzi's lens, his refuge, an art studio where he finds solace in painting.
What's the goal eventually?
No goal. That's the perfect part about it. It's just, it literally keeps me sane.
His refuge, far from the paparazzi's lens. In other words, we're not the paparazzi, we're ABC News. What's the goal of this? Your refuge. There's no goal, he says, grinning with those fake teeth. It just keeps me sane. But actually, there was a goal. And if you didn't know what a virtuous person Hunter Biden was, you might think it looked a lot like money laundering. 2 years after that interview, Hunter Biden was selling prints of his art. And to be clear, just the prints, not the, quote, art itself, but effectively photocopies of it for $75,000 a pop. Apparently, Hunter Biden moved 5 of these repros in just days. That's $375,000 in less than a week for signing copies of your fake art. As for the paintings themselves, childish self-indulgent blots, those sold for $500,000 apiece. So the question is, who bought them and why? It'd be interesting to know. There's a story there for sure, but of course we have no right to know. There's no public policy implication. It's not like Hunter Biden's finances have anything to do with his father's finances. Meanwhile, once his father did become president, corporate publisher Simon & Schuster lined up as well to pay Hunter Biden's bills. According to news reports, Simon & Schuster gave Hunter Biden millions of dollars for his highly selective account of his wholly unaccomplished life. And then the publisher lined up brainless celebrity endorsers like Dave Eggers and Stephen King to promote it. King, who apparently will say anything if it helps the party, called Hunter Biden's silly manuscript a, quote, harrowing and compulsively readable memoir. And then Stephen King described Hunter Biden himself as beautiful. Needless to say, the book sold miserably, but Hunter Biden got to keep the millions, and that was the point. And so on. This kind of thing apparently happened a lot. Again, there seems to be a story here, and we think it's probably worth learning a lot more about it and bringing it to you. In the coming weeks, we will. In the meantime, though, the question is, what can we learn from Hunter Biden's plea deal today? First off, the obvious. For the children of the people in charge, there are no penalties. There are only upsides. They're princelings. They can do what they want. You are not. Therefore, you can't. So don't get any ideas about cheating on your taxes or violating federal gun laws unless you want to celebrate next year's Father's Day through the glass in the visitor's room. The rules definitely apply to you, including rules you don't yet know exist. But there is also a deeper lesson here, a more disturbing one. What we're watching through Hunter Biden's life and through the Biden administration, now entering its third year, is the total inversion of virtue. What was once considered admirable is now derided as stupid, if not racist. That would include achievement, intelligence, honesty, self-control, humility. Those are features of the old America. Those were yesterday's virtues. They are gone. In their place, all that we once considered contemptible and repulsive, we're told to worship that now. Here's a small example, but we think a revealing one. In addition to his many other sins, Joe Biden has hired what has to be the single dumbest, nastiest, most dishonest, most ridiculous person he could possibly find for the very public position of White House press secretary. There's a point to it, of course. It was a humiliation exercise. It was designed to degrade the country and dispirit the rest of us. That's the White House press secretary? Shut up! But here's the thing. The White House press secretary herself has no idea why she's in the job. She thinks she's amazing. Here she is in a clip we just saw.
A year in this role, there's been a couple of things that has made me incredibly proud. Many things that made me incredibly proud to be at that podium during this historic moment. Again, this is a historic administration. I'm a historic figure, and I certainly walk in history every day.
I'm a historic figure? Imagine saying that. I'm a historic figure, but she does. And she says it in a burst of sincere self-congratulation, marked by her signature bad grammar. Illiterate, but proud. Of course she's proud. Karine Jean-Pierre is now a historic figure, just like Hunter Biden is now an important artist. I was like, that's right. Thank you, Senator.
Absolutely. Good.
Thank you for doing this.
Yes, sir.
So we spoke backstage, and you said that you have slept in your own bed 6 nights in the last month.
Not much, yes.
But that it doesn't bother you at all, and you're having a great time.
Yeah, I said behind the scene here that what a blessing to live in a country where we are free to praise the Lord. Amen. And that the Judeo-Christian foundation of this nation sets the standard across the world. That is what we talk about when we think about John 8:31 and John 8:32. John 8:31 says, you have to abide in me, and then you will know the truth, and that truth will set you free.
Amen. So, a nation that great has to beware of threats to its very existence.
Absolutely.
Yesterday, Biden mobilized reserves. What do you think of that? And are you concerned that we're moving, as we seem to be, toward war with Russia?
Yeah, so I would say that without any question, we should never allow American soldiers to be engulfed into the challenge between Ukraine and Russia. Our boots on the ground should not be there. The ability my mama wanted a preacher, so I'm going to stand up and do it the Southern way.
Preach!
Hallelujah! So, literally, I think one of the failures of President Biden has been his inability to articulate America's national vital interest in the conflict or the genocide in Ukraine. America's national vital interest is degrading the Russian military. When we degrade the Russian military, we make sure that our home front is safer and that our NATO ally partners that would cause us to send soldiers over is safe. When we have the land contiguous with Ukraine safe, we keep our American soldiers at home, and our primary objective should only be to engage when America's vital national interests are being engaged in. Unfortunately, President Biden has no ability to understand and appreciate what that looks like.
Wait, may I ask, so you're saying that it's in our national interest, vital national interest, to degrade the Russian military, in other words, to fight Russia with other people's soldiers?
I would say it this way. If you think about the world order that we established after World War II, if you think about a rules-based system, where does a rules-based system come from? It comes from this nation, our Judeo-Christian foundation, that says that there are rules of the road, that there is something called absolute truth. And we established that. As a part of that absolute truth, what we're trying to do is make sure that our home front remains safe. Keeping our home front safe means that evaluating the actual threats to our country, the most immediate military threat that could happen is Russia. Why is a good question. You look at their 6th generation jets, you look at their hypersonic weapons, you look at their nuclear arsenal. Everything that we do that degrades the Russian military is good for America. You look at the long-term threat to our nation, it's China. Their existential threat that we face long-term becomes China. You look at this rising axis of evil that we're seeing being formed, it's Russia, China, and Iran. Breaking that to pieces before it gets started, I think, is in our vital interest.
So on the day last February that Russia invaded eastern Ukraine, Russia and China were not allied, but within weeks of the sanctions that we applied and the stated intent of the Biden administration to effectively wage war with Russia, you saw an alignment which is now hardened between Russia and China. The United States military cannot, as you know, since you oversee it as a member of the Senate, cannot actually defeat Russia and China united. And so it would seem that the Biden policies have created a larger threat, no?
Well, I would say it by looking back to 2014. There are 2 times that we've seen incursions in Ukraine that create peril for America. The first time was under President Obama when he drew that red line in Syria and nothing happened, which gave permission to Putin to come in and take Crimea. The second time we saw was when President Biden sat back and watched as Scholz in Germany led the Western alliance to provide resources to Ukraine, which was a mistake colossal on our part. So what you saw was President Biden saying to Putin, I'm going to give you a list of areas that we don't want you to have cyber attacks. Weakness. Second that we saw, President Biden said, gosh, you know what? If you just take parts of it, it's okay. Well, when we have NATO territory that's contiguous, bombs, missiles on NATO territory creates a real challenge for our nation.
Well, you can see how it could become, the Third World War very quickly. So why not force a peace?
How would you do that?
Well, you could tell Ukraine, and they are a client state of the United States, without American backing, there's kind of no Ukraine. We're literally paying the salaries of their bureaucrats. We want you to sit down, as they tried to do, but were stopped by our government, and stop this war. Yeah. And reach a peace as one does, where both sides, concede some of their interests. Like, why wouldn't that be in our interest to do that?
I think the faster we get to peace, the better off we are. What we don't want to do, from my perspective, is allow ourselves to ask for a premature peace that cannot be achieved as the alliances continue to come together. To the extent that we can find our path out of this situation, the better off we are.
So what's the point at which we'll know that we've achieved our goal? And I say that within the context of having watched 20 years of occupation in Afghanistan, where nobody could answer the question, what's the point?
Yes.
And no one in Congress ever asked that question, amazingly. So what is the specific goal here?
Yeah, so I would say that the objective should be for Zelensky and Ukraine to be able to achieve victory by maintaining as much of their territory as they possibly can, and then seeing the resources that we've deployed, along with our Western alliances, achieving the peace that I believe comes when you get these 2 folks to sit down and have a conversation that allows them to determine where those lines will be drawn for the next 100 years.
Okay. Where are you on on the matter of sending cluster bombs to the Ukrainian military?
Well, if I was president of the United States, we wouldn't have to. Here's what you saw.
But now that we have, what do you think of it?
Well, I mean, I think they're there. So here's what I would suggest is.
Well, they're not. I don't think they're there yet. Do you think that we should send them?
I think that the mistake is when you have President Biden saying to the world that here are a host of weapons that we no longer have the ammunition to supply. You have a request coming from Ukraine saying we need more of the weapons that you say you don't have to provide. As opposed to keeping top secret information in your closet, you go to the front pages of every news station, you go to the screens, and President Biden says to the world, we don't have the ammunition. And so what you see from Ukraine is they say send the cluster bombs over. Under my administration, we would have the resources in a defense industrial complex that provides the weapons that we need and our Western allies need. We wouldn't be in this position at all.
Do you think he should send them?
I wouldn't have to. He already has agreed to do so.
Huh. Let me ask you a sort of non-Ukraine question. So I was just in Eastern Europe, much poorer than the United States. But one thing you notice in the cities I have visited there is that there aren't a lot of, or really any, drug addicts living on the streets, ODing on the streets. The so-called homeless problem, which is a huge feature of life in this country, doesn't kind of exist or seem to exist there. What do you think of the fact that we've got hundreds of thousands of people living on the streets and dying there? What should we do about it specifically?
In America?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that we are in the midst of a mental health crisis as a nation.
Yeah.
You think about the fact that there are several pieces of the puzzle that come together that we have not yet addressed. You look back into the 1980s and early 90s, we had 600,000 additional hospital beds for mental health issues that we have today. So part of the crisis that we see manifesting in three major areas is a mental health crisis that we can help solve if we address the actual mental health crisis that underlies those issues. The first one is the fact that over 100,000 Americans have lost their lives to overdoses in the last 12 months. 70,000 Americans have lost their lives because of fentanyl. We could stop fentanyl from crossing over our southern border by closing our southern border, building a wall for under, this nation spends $7 trillion. It would take $10 billion to finish the wall, and for an additional $5 billion, we could use the available technology to surveil our southern border and our ports of entry to slow down fentanyl from coming into our country. This is a part of that mental health epidemic that we face. Second thing I'd say is that we always hear people talk about gun violence in this nation. No one actually takes a step back from the conversation about gun violence and asks yourself, what does it appear to be? 55% or so, over 50% of gun-related deaths are suicides. No one ever says that. That is a mental health crisis. And you add those two together and couple it with the reality that because of COVID, we locked our kids out of schools because the left is so committed to the teachers' unions that they did the wrong thing for our kids. And what did we see as a result? A 30% plus increase of our youngsters going to the ER for mental health challenges. We need to get back to some honest bedrock truth that sets captives free. And the way that we do that is by focusing our attention on these three major issues that we need to address as a nation.
May I ask, and thank you for saying that about the 100,000 Americans, mostly young people, mostly not in the cities, dying every year. So that's hundreds of thousands just in the last several years. Why? And you said we should build the wall that was started and then dismantled. Why not build a human wall with, say, the reservists who were called up to go defend Ukraine? Why wouldn't they be defending our border?
Totally agree with you. Yeah.
Well, but there's no effort. I mean, the Pentagon has said, the last president kind of suggested that, didn't do anything about it, but he suggested it. And I think most people thought, well, that's not a crazy idea. And the Pentagon said, like, no, we're not going to do that, as if it's their call. why would you fund the Pentagon if they are refusing to defend the United States?
Well, here's what I've already done in my legislation. I created legislation that says, now, let me just do a survey of the audience. How many of y'all think we need 87,000 new IRS agents in America? I can't hear you. Say it one more time. I think y'all said no. I agree. Why not take the Inflation Reduction Act that actually increases inflation and the 87,000 new IRS agents that are funded by the $82 billion in additional funding for the IRS, which the $82 billion, about $40 billion is a target, people making under $200,000 of income? Why not take those 87,000 positions and put those folks on the border? Why not increase the pay of our border and patrol agents? Why not give them the resources they need to surveil our borders and do the jobs that they desperately want to do? As President of the United States, I would sign my legislation and divert the resources from the IRS to the border so that we could secure our border.
You're going to audit all those people coming in?
They said he was witty. I see it with my own eyes right now.
I'm for it, by the way.
Yes. Well, thank you very much.
Let's take a look at your taxes.
Well, here, listen. I mean,
no, but
yes.
you would. Bottom line,
I would
take
put
armed
the
Americans,
resources,
federal
the resources,
employees.
The resources. I would hire more. I would not take the IRS agent.
No, I know. I'm just totally joking.
And run them to the border. No, that's not exactly what I mean. What I mean is that. Take the billions of dollars and put them where America's security needs are first, which starts with our southern border. And by putting that $40 billion of resources on our southern borders, we could close the door. If you don't control your own back door, it's not your country.
Well, aren't you kind of being invaded at a certain point if you've got millions of military-age men coming into your country and hundreds of thousands of Americans are dying? Why is that not the job of the military to stop?
Listen, I don't disagree with you. One of the things I've said is that I would use every resource we have, to include the United States military, to stop the flow of fentanyl and to make sure that the Mexican cartels cease to exist.
Right.
I have legislation that does, I'll wait for that clap. I heard 2 people. I'm looking for 3. Can I get 4 in the house of God? Yes, this is great. Why not use the resources of our country to do what is the primary responsibility of the federal government, which is national security?
Amen.
That's the job.
So what do you do? I can't imagine many people would disagree with that. I wonder what you do with the millions of foreign nationals here illegally, many with fake papers, who are here. Like, what do you do with them? You become president.
Yes.
Sworn in January 2025, and you've got, let's say, 7 million people who've come in the last 4 years. What do you do with them? Do you deport them?
I think it's a very difficult task to deport them all at one time, but here's what we make sure they never do, is you never break the law and become an American citizen by breaking the laws.
Well, hold on, but would you deport any of them? How many would you deport?
I think you have to start the process of identifying where they are. Listen, this is a really important question. I hope that we don't miss this. Because those folks who come into our country illegally, even those who are seeking asylum, go around our country, and some of the asylum dates for your court appearance is 2033, 10 years from now. So finding those who've come to our country illegally has to be a part of the job number 1. And that means that we're going to have to take a look panoramically across our country and make sure that we stop this thing called sanctuary cities and sanctuary states that receive our resources to make sure that the federal government cannot figure out where the folks are. So in order for us to achieve the goals that the really brilliant guy on the stage, I'm not talking about myself, wants us to achieve, that was a compliment, by the way.
Oh, sorry, it went right over my head. I was like,
I want to make sure I get it. Sometimes I give compliments, I have to let people
Brilliant's
know.
a little strong.
Okay. Really smart cookie over here. Achieve, we have to identify where they are. And I'm not going to pretend that will be an easy task, but that should be the responsibility.
Well, wait a second. The federal government's knows where everyone is because everyone has a smartphone and they're tracking you.
Yes.
You know, so we know anyone using a fake social security number, Why not just like drop them off in Tijuana? Bye-bye.
Well, I'm going to appoint Tucker Carlson as my bye-bye ambassador to figure this out. So we're going to work together on this. And I'm
a sincere question. Like maybe the
well.
reason that people come by the millions, uninvited, illegally, making a mockery of the rule of law. I have to obey the law, but someone from Haiti doesn't? Or what? But they come because they know that no politician will say, come and you're leaving. Like, they don't put up with this in Japan.
Absolutely. Well, they don't put up
you're gone.
They don't
Why not do that?
Here's the fact. I would recommend that we do that. The question isn't that doing that. It's finding the 7 million that's already here and getting rid of them was the first question. The second question is a better question because if you look at the laws of Mexico, they have the same laws. They're stringent laws. The second time you're caught in the country, I believe the offense is 10 years in prison.
Oh, of course.
And so
it's a real country.
We enforce the laws of our country, and if we did so, we would not have the problem. What we have today is a president who does not mind our border being insecure, unsafe, and wide open. If I was president, we would shut that down, and we would stop folks. We would put back in place the asylum policy that requires you to receive or to request asylum on the countries that are contiguous with you, which doesn't include America, and we would also reinstate the stay in Mexico policy. So we would find a better path forward by just finishing the wall, reinstating policies that work, and stop that flow.
Well, so here's, I'm just interested because all measures are relative. So Russia's bad, Russia's a threat, Putin's evil, got it. But the total body count from Russia in the United States is right around 0. Like, I don't know anyone who's been killed by Russia. I know people personally who've been killed by Mexico. The government of Mexico allows fentanyl to be made in its country and to come over our border.
Yes.
And remittances from Mexico are a huge part of their economy. The Mexican government is party to the murder of hundreds of thousands of Americans. So why is Mexico less of a threat than Russia?
Well, two things. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Okay, but
frankly, here's
no Americans killed by Russia, hundreds of thousands killed by Mexico, but Mexico's our ally and Russia's our enemy. How does that work?
Well, I'm not going to pretend like the legislation I have sponsored and I would sign as President of the United States freezes the assets of the Mexican cartels, targets the Mexican cartels, and hopefully eliminates the flow of fentanyl. Because I do agree with you that 70,000 Americans losing their lives on an annual basis is an existential threat to America that we can solve. We don't have to choose. The good news is
Would you be willing to say to the Mexican government, your economy runs on factories right over the border, car plants, for example, but many other manufacturing plants, and we're just going to slap tariffs on that and tank your economy, like tomorrow, unless you stop allowing poison to come into our country? Like, why not do that?
I say you use every tool available to stop fentanyl from coming across our border. No exceptions.
Interesting. So I Googled you this morning. And
I did that last night with you, actually.
Don't ever do that.
I was like, wow, there's a whole lot to read here.
Oh, yeah. The pictures are fake, AI. But, I mean, there must have been 10 stories this morning about Tim Scott, shooting to the top and all super complimentary. And all these big Republican donors, like, Tim Scott's amazing. And a lot of support from some of the big money centers in the Republican Party, so congrats. I mean, every candidate wants that. But it got me thinking, and I'll ask all the candidates this, but what are the big issues on which you disagree with your donors?
Yeah. So, good news is, I'm glad to hear they're all flocking to me. I wish they would go ahead and write the check, too, because we haven't seen that yet. I will simply say that the issues that I strongly support is I believe America can do for anyone what she has done for me. We are living in a time. Thank you, ma'am. We are living in a time when there is this pervasive force, radical left, parts of corporate America, that continues to force this culture of grievance on the American people. And along with the culture of grievance comes this drug of victimhood, the narcotic of despair. That folks actually have figured out that you can make a profit off of conflict. I want to stand in the gap and say the truth of my life disproves the lies of the radical forces that believe that we should be in constant conflict with each other. America needs positive, powerful biblically sound leadership to regain the high ground. It's one of the reasons why when I became a Christian September 22nd of 1983, I started reading the gospel and understood that I'm a part of a bigger family, that a guy who grew up in a single parent household, mired in poverty, who wanted to know, who am I according to my Father? I found in Galatians 3:28 that I'm actually adopted, a joint heir in the family of God. And as part of that family, all things are possible. And there are forces in this nation that hate objective truth. Here's an objective truth: 2 genders, 1 truth. You see, here's where we have to get to. We have to get to a place where we are willing to understand and appreciate the strong foundation on which we stand. And whomever doesn't like that, count me as a force for the good of this nation. Count me as a guy who believes that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that you ask or imagine. And if you write a check and you don't like that, you can have your money back. Because I don't stand for donors. I don't stand for folks who contribute. I stand because there is a man who walked on this earth for 33 years, who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. And if I'm going to do my job is, according to Matthew 25:21, well done, my good and faithful servant. That's the job I have. That's the place I look for my support. If you play for an audience of 1, it doesn't matter who makes the contributions. And frankly, I don't know those donors that you're talking about who are flocking to my campaign. I'm looking forward to them coming. I really am. I look forward to it. I've heard the stories myself, but what I haven't seen is the millions and millions that you're talking about. But I will accept your check too, by the way. So thank you very much, Tucker, for wanting to be a contributor.
So I'll just end it with this. First of all, speaking for myself, I love what you just said, and I agree with it. Amen. It's just that a lot of Republican primary voters have gotten kind of cynical because the Republican Party doesn't care what they think, obviously. Yeah. And you just look at the polling, what Republican primary voters think, what is the Republican Congress doing? Like, there's no overlap between the two at all, okay? So over time, people get a little bit cynical, and they think, but you're in it, so you would know that maybe donors are kind of driving the agenda and not voters. Yeah. Well, and I lived in D.C. my whole life, and that's totally true, and you know it too. So are there cases, can you just name one, where the donors have come to you and said, I really like you, but this is the issue I really care about, where you said, I actually just disagree with you?
Well, let me give you an example where I am already consistently on the record. One of the areas, I'm the leading Republican on the banking committee. I think when banks go belly up and leave the bag for the American taxpayer, we should claw back the money from those bank executives. I led that legislation to get that done, number one. Number two,
donors don't like that.
They don't like that at all, no question about that. But we should not be concerned about the donors. We should be thinking about a responsibility. My responsibility is to the bosses that I serve. And when you're a United States Senator from the state of South Carolina, the primary boss I have are only South Carolinians. Whether you vote for me or not, I work for the people. As President of the United States, I will work for the people. Let me tell you what I'm running on, and this is really simple. If you take out a loan, you pay it back. Number one. Number two, my mother worked 16 hours a day as a nurse's aide. She'd come home after changing bedpans and rolling patients, and she taught me one very valuable lesson. There is dignity in all work. Therefore, if you're able-bodied, you work. That's called America. Number three, if you commit a violent crime, you go to jail. Period. Number four, men should compete in sports against men. And number five, our southern border is the major national security issue our nation faces. closing our southern border because of the national security risk that it poses is absolutely in America's best interest, period. And for those who don't like common sense conservative principles driven by the Judeo-Christian Foundation, choose another candidate. It's that simple.
Senator Tim Scott, ladies and gentlemen, South Carolina. Thank you very much.
Please subscribe.